to a new survey by BMO Capital Markets. Doug Porter is the bank's Deputy Chief Economist, and he joins us now. So let's start with the good news. What's come down in price?
Well, some of the most high-profile items like books and cars and even some magazine prices have really come down meaningfully. You know, some of the deepest price declines we've seen since the 1950s for a lot of those goods. So, you know, there has been some real reaction to the run-up in the currency to par over the past year.
I guess those are things that have got a lot of attention on this program in newspapers, etc.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the point. You know, it's because of that kind of pressure, I think that really did prompt retailers and wholesalers and manufacturers to adjust their prices because of the intense pressure. I mean, the deepest price declines we saw were right after the currency hit parity last September. Basically, the 3 months up till Christmas was the peak period when we saw price discounting.
What hasn't come down in price?
Well, a lot of the sort of kind of items that might fly under the radar and might be very tough to comparison shop. I found especially things like hardware, power tools. You know, classic example, barbecues. I did a sample of 3 barbecues, and on average they were about 33% more in Canada than the U.S.
Aren't they made in China anyway?
In most cases they are, and I think that this is kind of a classic example of, you know, firms are pricing to what the market will bear, and the U.S. is, you know, the most competitive market in the world, and of course the U.S. consumer is in recession. So we are seeing much more price restraint in the U.S. than in Canada.
Now, you mentioned that cars came down in price, but not all cars.
No, and you know, that's what's really interesting is there's a huge variability. There are some cars where the price difference is 10% or even a little bit less, and some where we haven't seen the prices budge one iota, where the gap is still 40% or even more. So, you know, it probably pays more than ever for consumers to look around, shop around across brands and you know, across the country to some extent.
Well, you alluded to the fact that people price things to what the market can bear, but is that the reason why things aren't cheaper here?
Well, I think it's part of the reason. I mean, part of it is a U.S. story because the U.S. market is so competitive, but I also think there's a little bit of a Canadian story. I mean, they are 2 separate markets. Generally, Canada's cost structure still remains a bit higher than it is in the U.S. for a variety of reasons. So that may be a reason why we'll never see absolute parity on prices between Canada and the U.S.
Is there the so-called middleman, people who have the rights to distribute things in Canada, they perhaps add to the cost of doing business?
I think in some cases that is an issue, but you know, when you look at the diverse amount of products we looked at and the number of goods and how consistent some of the price gaps were, I think that's, you know, that's an issue, but I don't think that's the only issue by any means.
Is there anything that sells for the same price in Canada as it does in the United States?
Oh, I found a few things. I mean, some magazine prices have actually been, you know, come down to U.S. levels. Video games, some audio equipment is basically the same in Canada as it is in the U.S.
What's the best way for people to help bring down high prices?
Well, I think, you know, even, you know, if you don't want to go cross-border shopping, even you know, comparison shopping within your own city and your own town, ask the retailer, like point out, you know, some of the price differences between Canada and the U.S. Ask them to justify it or to at least explain it. You know, I think really the ball is in the consumer's court now.
And in terms of the strong loonie, is it having, and what we're seeing here, is that all having an effect on inflation?
Well, it is. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why Canada has one of the lowest inflation rates in the world still. Our headline inflation rate, and that includes gasoline prices, is still below 2%. And I think a lot of it is because of, you know, partly because of the price cuts we have seen in things like cars and books over the past year.
Okay, well, thanks very much for talking to us today. Very interesting.
Okay, thank you.